This video is brought to you by Lord of Maps, creators of some of the most breathtaking maps you'll ever find. And they have a holiday sale going on right now. Stick around after the video for a special discount code for my viewers for lordofmaps.com. They were a people caught between two great powers, Númenor and Sauron. They were tamers of the mighty Mûmakil, and with the help of the Blue Wizards, their kingdom would be divided between those who served the Dark Lord and those who opposed him. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover the history of the Haradrim. As we learned in my Easterlings video, men first awoke in Hildorian, in the far east of Middle-earth. While the Edain would migrate to Beleriand, many men would remain behind where they are influenced by Morgoth, who works to corrupt them to his will. We are told that even among the men who fall under the Dark Lord's shadow, there is strife. And while some would settle in the eastern lands of Rhûn, others would come to lands in the far south of Middle-earth. Unlike a small portion of the Easterlings, none of the men of Harad would play any role in the events of the First Age. In a way, this would be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, they would not take part in the terrible and cataclysmic battles of the First Age. But on the other, they would not gain knowledge and craftsmanship from the elves as the Edain would. This likely contributes to their later position, trapped between a Dark Lord and a darkening kingdom. For many centuries throughout the First and early Second Ages, the Haradrim would be independent and isolated from the rest of the world, living in the vast lands in the south, of which we know very little. However, they would be directly impacted by the two great powers of the Second Age, Sauron and Númenor. By the year 600, the Númenóreans begin sailing to the east and reach the shores of Middle-earth, specifically Lindon, where they befriend Gil-galad, Círdan, and the elves of the realm. And by the 1200s, they begin making permanent settlements along the coasts of Middle-earth. Over the centuries, they would befriend the men of Middle-earth, including those of Harad, as they explore these coastal lands. And while the Haradrim had previously missed out on learning from the elves, they were now taught a great many things by the Númenóreans. The Haradrim learn a great deal about agriculture and craftsmanship from their new friends. The Númenóreans construct the great port city of Umbar, which becomes a very important location in the south. As we know, Sauron would work hard to corrupt the men of the East during this period of relative peace in Middle-earth. Likewise, he would work to corrupt the men of the South as well. Sometime around 1600 of the Second Age, the Valar decide to send their first two emissaries to Middle-earth, and the Blue Wizards sail across the sea, likely arriving at the Grey Havens. We've long known that the Blue Wizards traveled to both the east and the south of Middle-earth, as they seek to disrupt the influence of Sauron. While we've known for some time their efforts in the east were quite successful, what we recently learned from the new Nature of Middle-earth book is that the Blue Wizards also saw success in the south as well. It is believed that there was a great deal of rebellion of good Haradrim against Sauron's influence, but little leadership among them. Thus, the wizards make their way to Harad to rally those resisting Sauron, much as Gandalf would later do with the men of the West. We are told in this new book that it is in part thanks to the Blue Wizards that 93 years pass between Sauron creating his One Ring and the Dark Lord finally making his war on the elves of Eriador. However, Númenor itself would fall under a shadow and become a second threat to the Haradrim. As the centuries roll on, the Númenórean kings, and by extension their people, grow bitter over their perceived curse of mortality. While having lifespans far greater than the men of places like Harad, the Númenórean lifespan was nothing compared to the immortal elves. Thus, bitterness against the Valar and Eldar grows among the island nation. In 1869, Tar-Kiryatan becomes the 12th king of Númenor, which marks a turning point for their relationship with Harad. Kiryatan leads his people to set themselves up as lords above the men of Middle-earth, including the Haradrim. They demand the men of the south to pay tributes of both goods and wealth. For quite some time, Sauron did not dare to challenge the might of the Númenóreans. They were simply too great a force. However, after the creation of the Rings of Power and the reveal of the Nazgul, Sauron comes to rule as a god-king over many men in the east and the south. Under Sauron's rule, these men build many towns and walls of stone and become fierce warriors. So let's take stock of the situation in Harad as it stands in the middle of the Second Age. We know that the evil Númenórean kings have set themselves up as oppressors over the port cities of Harad. In 2280, these kings' men make Umbar into a great fortress. We know that Sauron is, in both the south and the east, worshipped by many as a god-king. And we know that the Blue Wizards are working against Sauron in both realms, among those who would oppose the Dark Lord. Now this is just my own speculation here, but I can't help but imagine that the Blue Wizards are not only fighting a battle on two fronts, being the east and the south, but also fighting two enemies within the south itself, trapped between the opposing sides of Sauron and Númenor, neither of which being truly on the side of the Haradrim themselves, but merely seeking influence over them. After what is likely hundreds of years of struggle in the region, Ar-Pharazôn is enraged by Sauron's claims to be the Lord of the Earth and King of Men, and lands a mighty fleet at Umbar in 3261. They marched through the lands of Harad to meet Sauron in combat. However, the might of Númenor is so great that Sauron's servants flee rather than face them. Sauron, realizing he cannot defeat Númenor through military might, humbles himself before Ar-Pharazôn and is taken prisoner to Númenor. Initially, we may think this would be a net positive for the Haradrim. One of their oppressors has been removed from their lands. However, it would only get worse. In a remarkably short time, Sauron becomes Ar-Pharazôn's chief advisor, and under the Dark Lord's influence, the evil Númenóreans become even more ruthless in their oppression of Harad. The king's men begin enslaving not only the good Númenóreans, known as the Faithful, but also men from Harad, with Sauron using both for human sacrifices to Morgoth. As we know, Sauron's corruption of Númenor would directly lead to its destruction, and while the faithful Númenóreans would escape to create the realms of Gondor and Arnor, many of the king's men living in Harad survive as well, thus becoming the Black Númenóreans. With the Black Númenóreans fully focused on Middle-earth, and Sauron setting up his stronghold in the lands of Mordor, the Haradrim are once again caught between two dark forces. But now, these forces are united, for the Black Númenóreans worship Sauron, and together they would recruit many Haradrim to the Dark Lord's service. As centuries pass and Sauron's power and influence grows, the last alliance of elves and men is formed to take the fight to Mordor. Thanks in part to the work of the Blue Wizards in aiding the good men of Harad, Sauron's operations in the south are hindered, and he is defeated in the War of the Last Alliance in 3441. Just as we saw with the Easterlings, while the downfall of Sauron meant his direct influence over the Haradrim was gone, his work of hundreds or even thousands of years would not be undone so easily. Some among the Haradrim who had served Sauron would turn from his evil and even become subjects of Gondor. Others would not be so easily freed. Still, for nearly 1,000 years, the realms of Gondor and Harad would not come into conflict. The Black Númenóreans dwindle in number and merge with the men of Middle-earth. While one of their number becomes the Queen of Gondor, and is both mysterious and conniving, no conflict between the nations came during these years. It is around the year 1000 that Sauron first re-emerges in Dol Guldur, and it happens that shortly before this, conflict arises once again between Harad and Gondor. In 913, Eärnil I becomes the 13th king of Gondor. He repairs the havens of Pelargir and builds up Gondor's navy. In 933, he takes control of Umbar from the Black Númenóreans by attacking from both land and sea. Just 3 years later, Eärnil is lost at sea, along with many of his men and ships. During the reign of his son, Kiryandil, the Black Númenóreans would return. These lords launch a siege upon Umbar with a massive force, and in 1015, Ciriandil is killed. However, due to the great naval power of Gondor, they withhold the siege for many years. Ciriandil's son, Ciriaher, eventually brings a force by both land and sea, defeating the Haradrim in 1050. As king, he extends the realm of Gondor south to the river Harnen and to the port and haven of Umbar. In his pride, he takes the name Hyarmendesil, South Victor, and the kings of Harad acknowledge him as their overlord. They pay homage to Hyarmendesil and give their sons as hostages in the court of the king of Gondor. Now, we've made reference many times to the city of Umbar and its importance to the Númenóreans and the Haradrim. No doubt one of the first things that'll come to mind when speaking of this area is the corsairs of Umbar, the pirates who sailed from its port. And from 1448 all the way to the time of Aragorn, Middle-earth would witness the Corsair Wars between Gondor and the Sea Raiders of the south. While the Haradrim would often ally with the Corsairs, and their histories intertwine much during this period, we'll cover the Corsair Wars in their own video here on the channel. Instead, we will look toward the War of the Ring in the later Third Age. We know that the Blue Wizards were at work in the east and the south, and their efforts would help to defeat Sauron. For without their work, the Easterlings and Haradrim serving Sauron would have vastly outnumbered the men of Gondor and Rohan. We also know that Gandalf had at least once traveled to the south for an unspecified purpose, as we are told his name there was Incanus, likely meaning North Spy, indicating that he was likely not trusted by many he came in contact with. While we don't know what the Haradrim standing against Sauron did, we certainly know about those who served him. The Southrons, as they are also called, are among Sauron's servants who attack Osgiliath on June 20th, 3018. Their forces are led by the Witch King, and the entire attack is simply to gauge Gondor's strength and provide cover for the Nazgul to sneak across the Anduin to seek out the Shire and the One Ring. Over the coming months, more Haradrim would continue to Mordor, coming up the Harad Road. On March 17, 3019, Frodo and Sam witness Faramir and the Rangers of Ithilien ambushing one of these groups of Haradrim marching to Mordor. And here we meet what is called one of the most brutally effective beasts of war the later world had ever seen, the Mûmakil. Referred to as Oliphants by the hobbits, these creatures come from the jungles of Far Harad, the lands off the very maps of Gondor to the far south of Middle-earth. As the Rangers attack, the Mûmak goes into a rage, smashing the war tower upon its back and trampling men from both factions as it disappears into the woods. In a famous passage, we are told of the battle between the Haradrim and Gondorians from Sam's point of view, where he guesses what we know to be true. The situation in Harad was far from a simple matter of all willingly serving Sauron. It was Sam's first view of a battle of men against men, and he did not like it much. He was glad that he could not see the dead face. He wondered what the man's name was, and where he came from, and if he was really evil of heart, or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would not really rather have stayed there, in peace. On March 14, 3019, Haradrim joined the army of the Witch King in the siege of Minas Tirith, marching to the Pelennor fields. We are told there is some 18,000 Haradrim and several of their beasts of war. The Mûmakil are used to bring forth war towers and siege engines to use against the mighty walls of the great city. As the morning of March 15th dawns and the Battle of Pelennor Fields ensues, the leader of the Haradrim would come face to face with Theoden of Rohan. Southward beyond the road lay the main force of the Haradrim, and there their horsemen were gathered about the standard of their chieftain. Then he was filled with a red wrath, and shouted aloud, and displaying his standard, black serpent upon scarlet, he came against the white horse and the green. With great press of men, and the drawing of the scimitars of the Southrons was like a glitter of stars. Then Theoden was aware of him, and would not wait for his onset, but crying to Snowmane, he charged headlong to greet him. Great was the clash of their meeting, but the white fury of the Northmen burned hotter, and more skilled was their knighthood with long spears and bitter. Fewer were they, but they clove through the Southrons like a firebolt in a forest. Right through the press drove Theoden, Thengil's son, and his spear was shivered as he threw down their chieftain. Out swept his sword, and he spurred to the standard, hewed staff and bearer, and the black serpent foundered. Then all that was left unslain of their cavalry turned and fled far away. In the aftermath of their leader's death, the Haradrim would use their Mûmakil as rallying points. After Theoden's death at the hands of the Witch King, and Éomer discovering his sister, assumed to be dead on the battlefield, the new king flies into a rage, charging against the forces of Mordor. Despite a valiant advance, the horses of Rohan panic when they finally come to the massive Mûmakil. Then Gothmog sends in elite Haradrim warriors, Variags, and trollmen against the Rohirrim. Sauron's army forces Éomer's retreat to the docks near Harland, and when he sees the black sails of the Corsairs, he prepares to die as the final leader of Rohan. However, it is not the pirates of Umbar who arrive, but Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, the sons of Elrond, the Rangers of the North, and reinforcements from the southern fiefdoms of Gondor. A great portion of Sauron's forces are now caught between Éomer and Aragorn, as if between hammer and anvil. As most flee in a scattered retreat, many Easterlings and Haradrim hold their ground and fight to the very death. 10 days later, Aragorn leads the remnants of the Men of the West to march upon the Black Gate of Mordor. Sauron's army of orcs, trolls, and men outnumber the Gondorians and Rohirrim by more than 10 to 1. The men of Gondor and Rohan are trapped, and the hopeless battle ensues. But in that moment, Gollum, having bitten the ring from Frodo's finger, slips into the cracks of doom, and the One Ring is finally destroyed. With Sauron's power overthrown, and his Nazgul destroyed in the eruption of the volcano, the orcs and creatures of Sauron were completely directionless. They mindlessly flee, some falling into pits, others killing themselves, and many retreating to unknown lands. Among the men, many Easterlings and Haradrim surrender or flee. Others, perhaps those most ensnared by Sauron, banded together and fought on to their deaths. Once again, with the defeat of Sauron, this time never to return, the lands of Rhûn and Harad are finally freed from his rule and influence. However, as we saw in my Easterlings video, the ancient and long-standing corruption does not immediately go away, though it does seem that the men of Harad were more easily freed than those of Rhûn, where Sauron had no doubt spent more of his time. We are told that after Aragorn is made king of the reunited kingdom, he makes peace with the men of Harad, and that he completely subdues the city of Umbar. And while Éomer and Aragorn would occasionally need to march to the south or the east to maintain peace, the relationship with the men of the south was largely a positive one. We are even told that embassies would travel from Harad and visit Aragorn's court in Minas Tirith. The Haradrim we meet are great warriors and tamers of the mighty Mûmakil. While they would be among Sauron's fiercest servants, we also know that, like the Easterlings, many of their number instead refused Sauron, possibly fighting against him alongside the likes of the Blue Wizards. In the days of peace in the Fourth Age, with Sauron defeated and the Corsairs subdued, there would finally be the opportunity for peace to reign in the lands of the South, the lands of the Haradrim. Now, if you're looking for a great holiday gift for the Middle-earth fan in your life, visit LordOfMaps.com. Originally hand-drawn, these maps feature locations all around the world in a fantasy style sure to be a great conversation piece. And right now, they have a buy one, get one 50% off sale for the holidays. Or you can use the code NERDOFMAPS to save 15% off your order. Visit LordOfMaps.com today. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Kella Brimbor, Jim Limber Davis, Listen Me the Cinda, Mandu Pandu, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Salim Rahman, Zetrock, Berto Berg, Grand Strategy Nerd, Graham Darricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description and purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.